The Special Education Committee, and today we're going to be talking about the United States prison system. So we're going to be talking about the profits that come from it, whether that be from industry like private industries or the government, or also profits like if you're deciding to go to prison within the next 10-15 years like Connor over here, how you can actually make some money, and yeah, he's going to Enron it, but no, how you can actually make some money while in prison. But then we're also going to talk about the costs on society as well as the individuals. So let's talk about the money behind all of it and who exactly is in prison, the demographics of it. So right now, there's about 2.2 million people in the United States that are in prison. We imprison more people in our country than any other country in the world. The United States is about 5% of the world's total population, but we're 25% of the world's prison population. So there's really no argument that mass incarceration is or isn't happening. It definitely is occurring in the US. And now a lot of this has started since around 1980. It really started to increase about fourfold. And there's, I'm sure, a bunch of economic and societal things you could think of that might have attributed to that. But the big thing that most people point to is the war on drugs. Reason being that now if you look at crimes that people have committed that are in prison, a huge portion are in there for either violent or non-violent. There's some type of drug offense related to their imprisonment. So when you break down the demographics of prisons, you'll find that it's 37% black, 32% white, and 22% Hispanic. Now, when you compare this to the total population of the US, you'll see that, which is 13% black, around 75% white, and 17% Hispanic. Minorities are way more overrepresented within the US prison system compared to whites that are very much underrepresented. And so, to put that in perspective, if you look here, this is the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment of US residents born in 2001. And you can see all the different stats there, but one thing I want to focus on is that if you're a white male, you have a 1 in 17 chance of ending up in prison. But for black males, that number is 1 in 3, which is really staggering to think about. And so keep that in mind as we talk about especially the costs on society and to individuals, that it disproportionately affects minorities compared to whites. So where is everyone being sent? Most are being sent to public prisons. About 92% of prisoners are in public prisons, and that's run by federal, state, and local governments. Now, to the taxpayer, this comes out to about $63.4 billion a year paid in taxes to keep this industry flowing. And now there's an even bigger economy here on the outside because there's so many jobs that are that are part of our society that have money attached to the prison system. So you've got prison guards, people that run the prisons, but then you also have the lawyers for the inmates, the district attorneys, judges, police officers, politicians. There's a lot of money here at stake, and also industries you might not really think of being involved. A couple billion-dollar industries, actually. Phone companies are able to charge about $1 for every minute that someone uses within a prison, and a lot of private industries are brought in for the health care of prisoners. So these types of things really add up. A lot of people have a lot of money at stake, which you could probably make the argument that is why that prison populations have been increasing over time. So private prisons. Has anyone heard anything about private prisons recently in the news? Yeah, anyone? Yeah, so the government recently ruled that they're not going to renew the private prison contracts, which a lot of prison reform advocates were very happy about. Now this will take, if it holds up, this will take a couple years because they're letting the contracts that are on the books stay on the books. But it's worth noting that the private prison industry has a ton of money, a huge lobbying presence in Washington, D.C. So it's really something to pay attention to in the next couple of years if that holds up, if the government's able to hold true to that, or if the private industry will be able to kind of fight back. So this industry is currently about 8% of the prison population is in private prisons, and that amounts to about a $4.8 billion industry for a lot of the jobs I mentioned earlier. The real interesting thing here, though, is that there's $630 million in profits each year by these companies on average. And now, this brings up a big moral and ethical dilemma. Because first of all, they make money by getting government contracts, but then they're allowed to cut corners, and any money they save, they can keep. And that can lead to more dangerous prison environments, worse health care for prisoners, really just anything to cut a corner, save a penny, they do. And also, a lot of prisoner labor is exploited. Companies even like Boeing and McDonald's have even benefited from prison labor in these types of industries. And also it comes down to, criminals are really needed to keep this industry, the private industry especially, flowing. So, does this incentivize on the outside district attorneys, judges to have longer sentences, things like mandatory minimums maybe, or even police forces for trying to make more arrests because there's a lot of money here at stake, and you're not really thinking of it as humans, you're thinking of it more as profit. So now that we've looked at the money on the outside of prison walls, let's talk about how we can actually make some money within prison walls.
Yeah, so Jimmy talked about how prisons affect the economy as a whole. I just want to look at economies that actually happen within a prison. And just a little overview is that we're going to take a look at currencies that occur within a prison, how to obtain these currencies, and lastly, how to make a profit while in prison. So when someone is convicted of a crime and they're entered into prison, they're not allowed to bring anything with them. You can't have clothes, you can't have food, and you especially can't have money. So if you're a prisoner and you still want to take part in the bartering system that happens within prison walls, you have to obtain some kind of currency. So throw back to your intro to macro class. Does anyone know what a principal function of money is? Shout it out. Yeah, store of value is one, so it can't perish over time. Has to have a unit of account. Last one? And a medium of exchange, yeah, so it has to be worth something. With those three functions in mind, can anyone think of some kind of strange commodities that might be traded in prison?
Like I read an article, it said instant noodle is now a new trade that they actually trade. Instant noodles?
Yeah, ramen, yeah. Actually, ramen might be one because prisons are trying to cut costs, and prisoners aren't getting enough to eat, and they want to maintain their regular caloric intake, and they're very hungry, so they're trading ramen as like a commodity. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Any other examples?
Prison shanks.
Yeah, you could definitely barter anything that you can try to barter. Definitely. Some strange ones that I came across are canned tuna and mackerel. People trade it because it has a store of value, doesn't perish over time. And actually a really good example of one is postage stamps. And the reason being, they have all three functions of money. And lastly, that you can trade it, you could give it to your friends and family and actually make money outside of prison. So those are some kind of like currencies, if you will, within the prison. But how do you obtain these currencies? Well, you can do it either legally or illegally. A legal way to do it is you can work, you can have a job within prison, but these jobs aren't guaranteed, and they only pay a fraction of the wage. Kevin's going to talk about that in a little bit. The second way that you can do it legally is whether your friends and family can donate to your commissary account. A commissary, for you guys that don't know, is just like a little store within a prison and has like the basic necessities that you can buy. The problem with this is that, number one, you have to have friends and family. Number two, they have to have money. And number three, they have to be willing to donate money to you. So this isn't a viable option for some prisoners. So some illegal ways to make money in prison is you could trade contraband, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Other dangerous activities like gambling and theft, but these activities are way more dangerous in prison than out of prison. And lastly, you have yourself, so you can provide services. So you can be a hitman, you could be a bodyguard, you could even be a call girl. So how do you profit in prison? Well, it's all about supply and demand. I'm going to talk about the contraband, and in particular, the trading of cigarettes. So actually, at one point in time, cigarettes were used as currency within prison. They had like a set value. You could trade a pack of smokes for like, a piece of chicken or something like that. It had an exact value. But in 2004, prisons banned cigarettes within the walls. So what we all learned in Econ 102, when the supply is shifted to the left and there's less of it, and the demand remains relatively inelastic, the price skyrockets. So how do you make a profit from this? Right here is a pouch of tobacco you can get at Walmart, Sam's Club, whatever. It runs about $5 or something like that. So you find a way to sneak it within the prison, and each of these pouches will go for about 50 books of stamps within a prison. Now that runs to about $500 right there. Now if you can get one of these pouches and roll them into like tiny mini cigarettes, you can sell each of those mini cigarettes for a book of stamps each. So if you have a pouch, you split it 100 ways, you can make essentially, you get 500 books of stamps. So that's $1,000 from like a $5 package. That's a 20,000% increase. It's a pretty decent business model. Lastly, one little story to tell is that there was one particularly annoying inmate, and his bail was set at $25. So a bunch of prison guards came together and like donated $25, but he actually refused because he said he was making more money within the prison system than if he were to leave the prison system. So just a little fun fact for you. Now that we talked about some of the ways to profit while in prison, I'm going to transfer it over to Kevin, and he's going to talk about some of the costs that prisons incur on society.
Good evening. Is that excessive? Okay. So we've looked at prisons and how you can make a profit from a administrative side as well as actually inside the prison as an inmate. But what kind of costs are these inmates incurring on themselves and to society? So the first thing that you're going to face as an inmate is an extreme cut or loss to your income. So the average American worker right now makes over $25 an hour, where as an inmate at low skill you will be making between 12 and 40 cents an hour, and high skill you'd be lucky to be making $1.15 an hour. So that's an extreme loss in income. Also, your wages are going to be subjected to many fees and taxes. So I'm going to use my good friend Margaret as an example. So Margaret is going to prison, and she is making high skill wages, so you're doing all right for yourself. But 50% of your income is going to the IFRP, or the Inmate Financial Responsibility Program, and that goes to pay for things like crime victim funds and things of that nature. But your case is special because you stabbed someone in the butt, and that's why you're in jail. You have to pay victim restitution for gluteal reconstructive surgery. On top of that, you also have 16 children, so you also have to pay for child support. Luckily, you're not making enough money to pay for taxes, but that is a possibility. So, in addition to that, you will also face markups at the commissary. So, simple things like a toothbrush could be marked up 4, 5, even 1,000%. So, 4 to 500 and 1,000, not 4,000. Sorry. And the last thing I wanted to point out was prison fees. So, I want to make a specific reference to Jeremy Barrett. So, he got assaulted in prison, got his eye gouged out. It's no longer in his head. And he tried to sue for negligence on the behalf of the Florida Department of Corrections. The Department of Corrections filed a countersuit saying that Jeremy took resources from us. He spent 1,095 days in jail, and he took up $50 a day. So you multiply those two together, you get over $54,000 in debt to this prison. And guess what? The judge sided with the Department of Corrections, so he has to pay that fine now. Is that fair? I don't know. I can't say, but it's definitely unfair. This is actually this is Jeremy after the incident. He's doing okay. He is now on SpongeBob, so some things work out. We want to move on to societal costs now. What is happening to society? How are we dealing with these inmates? So, and what kind of costs are they incurring on us? So the average inmate costs $31,000, and this was a study done over 40 states, with New York State being the most expensive at $60,000 an inmate. It's a lot of money, a lot. In New York City, inmates can cost up to $168,000 annually to watch, and that's just to sit in a box. So it's a lot of money, and most of that money is going towards paying for people like police officers, guards, judges, things of that nature. And lastly, I want to talk about the costs of seeking the death penalty versus life in prison. So by show of hands, how many of you think the death penalty is more expensive than life in prison? Okay, so like less than half, and I'm assuming the rest think life in prison. It's actually death penalty by a large margin, and for multiple reasons. So the death penalty, a case seeking the death penalty will cost upwards of $1.2 million after all court fees. And these are fees that taxpayers are subjected to. So like if you have like a public defender. Versus life in prison, you can see fees up to $720,000 per inmate, So large margin just right off the bat, just the case fees. On top of that, a death row inmate costs $90,000 a year. So you're already seeing a 3 times increase in just keeping the person alive until they're executed. So a lot of costs. Last thing I just wanted to point out is this graph here. So this is Nebraska in 2015. So of the 1,800 murders that happened in Nebraska, 119 cases sought the death penalty, and only 3 executions actually occurred. So a lot of money was lost in this funnel here due to case fees and things of that nature. And we want to ask ourselves, whether or not there should be a death penalty or, versus life in prison. You want to weigh moral aspects of it as well as the economic and financial factors as well. So kind of shifting gears now, we want to move away from inmates in prison to inmates that have now come back to society. So we want to kind of look at what kind of policies can we implement or change to help the assimilation of inmates back into society. And Alex is going to talk more about that.
Thank you. All right. So let's talk about the economic aftermath of prison, not only on the local economies where these prisons are, but also on the individuals, and then some policy changes that can mitigate these effects. So the local economies. The majority of these prisons are being built in rural areas. The local governments love this. They're saying that these prisons are bringing jobs, they're stabilizing the economies, but there's some arguments over whether or not this is a good thing. On one hand, you could say this is really not good. This would be like a town 10 miles out of State College, which is likely to experience some sort of economic development in the next decade, some sort of structural changes. Now that they have a prison, businesses don't want to go there, people don't want to move there, and they're missing out on a lot of these depressed property values, which lowers the actual taxes that the governments are collecting. Where it could be a good thing is, let's say you're in a town where your best restaurant is a Denny's, and your family business is you take hammers and you turn big rocks into little rocks. This town probably isn't going to turn into a metropolis, and at least at this point you have lower poverty levels, and that's a really good thing. So the individuals. Amongst employers, there's a big social stigma. They're saying 40% of them are saying that they don't want to hire anybody with a criminal record, just on principle. This leads to really lower rates of employment. Now, when people get out of prison and they're not employed, they're very likely that they're going to turn right back to crime. So let's talk about Joe Smith. Joe Smith has a job, he has a family, but on the side, sometimes he likes to go out and sell large amounts of marijuana to high schoolers. So one day he's hanging around behind the high school, he's throwing bags of marijuana, the kids are jumping up and grabbing them, and the cops roll by and Joe gets thrown in jail. His family finds out, his job finds out, and he really loses everything. But while in jail, there's this one little, tiny little bright spot, and he falls in with this good group of people. He joins the Aryan Brotherhood. All there. Wow. They give him vocational training. They basically turn the guy into a criminal. He learns how to fight, how to steal, and he gets a social network of awful people. When he gets out of prison, he is likely to go back to crime. He's probably not going to get employed, and he's probably going to go back to selling drugs, and he's probably going to be involved in this gang. So he's likely to have recidivism, which is he's going to be in this prison structure, going in, going out, and that leads to this levels of unemployment. Now, when I say 1% loss in unemployment, think about the Fed. Think about what the Fed releases every month. So it's 5% unemployment, it could be 4%. This translates into a $54 to $65 billion loss in GDP every single year. That money could be put towards education, or it could be put towards even rehabilitation programs, which leads me to my next point of changes in policy. The big one that they say is ban the box. So ban the box is saying, look, you don't need to know if this guy's a felon or a criminal, at least until after you get the chance to know him. You should be unbiased in viewing a resume. But the problem with that, and I think the employers know, as well as the prisoners know, as well as we know, prison is not meant to rehabilitate, it's meant to punish. And that's a big problem. So Big data is showing that increased rehabilitation with a focus on individual needs is most successful in reducing rehabilitation and getting these people back into the workforce, getting them out of crime. What that would look like is maybe, over here you need a lot of therapy after, over there, you need drug rehab, or maybe some of you just need to get out of the neighborhood you're in. You need a nice place to live. The problem with this is that it's very, very expensive, and a lot of people don't want to propose massive tax hikes to give prisoners therapy. It's not popular. But the last point, reinvest cost savings, is if you don't have somebody in the prison, you're not paying for them to be there. So maybe 10 people leave, $50,000 a year. You have $500,000 that you can now put towards therapy, and eventually the idea is that enough people leave, you can actually lower the amount of money you're spending. So now let's break up into discussion groups, and I think Jimmy's going to take that.
Yeah, so we're breaking into 5 groups, Connor, if you don't mind helping out. We're going to do it by last name, try to break it up that way. We'll go A through F, back here in this left corner with Mercedes. And I'll be right here in this corner.